the Frank G. Zarb School of Business and WRHU-FM Radio Hofstra University invite you inside the Z-Suite.
Hello, I'm Janet Lenihan, Dean of the Frank G. Zarb School of Business at Hofstra University. Welcome to Inside the Z-Suite, where we explore how to lead with impact in today's dynamic and increasingly complex business world. Today's episode explores one of the most essential and often underappreciated pillars of business leadership, corporate governance. We'll explore what it means, why it matters, and how it shapes the long-term strength, integrity, and health of an organization. I am thrilled to be joined by someone who brings deep insight and lived experience to this topic, Debra Sandler, a distinguished Hofstra alumna and a highly respected voice in the boardroom. Debra is a seasoned executive, corporate director, and partner at TrueStar, a boutique search firm focused on building stronger, more inclusive boards. She currently serves on the boards of Archer Daniels Midland, Keurig Dr. Pepper, Gannett, and Dollar General, where she chairs the governance committee, highlighting her passion for strategic leadership and oversight. She is also a board advisor to Pharmavite and the founder of Mavis Foods, a business inspired by her Caribbean heritage. Debra's leadership journey includes top positions at PepsiCo, Johnson & Johnson, and Mars Inc., and she is widely recognized for her work in promoting inclusive and effective corporate governance. Her awards includes being named among Savoy Magazine's most influential Black corporate directors and Black Enterprise's Registry of Black Corporate Directors. Of course, we are especially proud to have her as a long-serving trustee of our university. Debra, welcome to Inside the Z-Suite. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So we have so much to unpack today on this topic, but I think we need to start first by defining corporate governance, because although governance is a term that's thrown around a lot, I don't necessarily know that everyone has a clear picture of what it means in practice. So for those of us who may not be as familiar, how would you describe corporate governance and why is it so critical?
So let's start with the different forms of corporate governance. When this topic comes up, we're typically talking about public boards and corporate governance for public boards. But it's important to note that there's corporate governance as well for pre-IPO boards and private boards. As you mentioned, I'm an advisor of a privately held company, and the responsibilities vary dramatically from one type of board to the other. Let's focus today, for the most part, on public boards. Public boards have a very critical role to play. Public boards basically are there to act on behalf of the shareholders. We have a fiduciary responsibility to look at governance oversight. Is the company operating according to the laws of the country and of the state? To take a look at the strategic direction, not to manage the company, but to ensure that the strategic direction makes sense and that it's on track, as well as to oversee the senior management. So technically, the CEO reports to the board, and the board has oversight over who runs the organization, as well as just understanding succession planning and the strength of the leadership, the executive leadership team. So amongst other things, but those are the primary responsibilities of a corporate board. At the end of the day, you just have to keep in mind, we are there not to be friends necessarily with the management team. We are there to represent the shareholders, and we have a fiduciary right to do so. Responsibility, I should say, to do so.
Clearly, such an important responsibility and role that you play. Based on all of your experience, in your mind, what sets apart strong corporate governance from not so strong corporate governance?
And, it's funny, we have something that says, when you've seen one board, you've seen one board. It's like any organization. The culture inside of the boardroom varies from one company to the next. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it should, in some respect, take into account the type of business that you're in. Is it fast-paced? Is it slower? Is it more short-term planning required or longer-term planning? But with respect to the responsibilities of, the board, you have to first make sure you have the right people sitting around the room. The people that are representing the shareholders have the skills and experience needed to guide the corporation. That's the first thing. And when you lack that, that's when, sometimes boards get into trouble. But I would say, in my experience, the thing that sets a good board apart from perhaps a not so effective board is courage. That means, we have boards that, may or may not be effective. Are you taking a look at who's around the room and making changes in the appropriate amount of time to make sure that you have the right people? It's very hard to ask someone to step down from a board. Courageous board leaders do that. And they do that routinely to make sure that we've got the right people around the room, because the business changes. And it doesn't mean that you're not a good board member. Your skills may not suit the needs of the company going forward. And so we require strong board leadership, typically the board chair or the independent board leader, to work very carefully to make sure that we've got the right people and that we make those courageous decisions, as well as sometimes it's very difficult, but you may have to change leadership. Since we are representing the shareholders, you may love a leader, a CEO, but if the results are not there, then the board has to act. And so there's a certain amount of courage. It's the responsibility. You'd be surprised how many times we all know it doesn't always happen. And so I would say that courage is perhaps one of the things, in my view, that sets the board apart. The courage to do the job, actually, that you're put there to do.
So I want to dig more deeply into that because I think that's so fascinating. But before we do, how has the role changed recently? Does it require even more courage now, given what's happening?
I don't know if it requires more. It might. I got on my first board in 2015, so it's been about 10 years, and there are people with even more experience than I have. As you mentioned, I sit on 4 very different types of businesses, very different boards. Today, I do think that the role of the board member has changed. And it's changed in part because business has changed, right? We all went through COVID. As a business person, the challenges of a business today, in my view, seem to be greater than they were 10, 15 years ago. Some of that is related to technology. Some of that is related to the world we live in and the changes. So boards today might be dealing with things that we just didn't even fathom 10 years ago, whether that is cybersecurity, right? Whether that is the level of inflation or taxes or tariffs. Some of those things, have come and gone in the past. But we also now have a higher level of activism, and the laws have changed around, that. And so I think you have to just be much more astute. You have to be on your game. Not that you didn't have to in the past, but I do think it's heightened today than in the past. As a result, boards get sued a lot. And so people who tell me, I want to get on a board, I'm like, you have to really understand. This is a huge responsibility. It's not necessarily a fun thing to do to just get on a board. You have to realize what your role is. Not everyone's going to agree with the decisions of the board, and they will be challenged. And so, yes, I do think that the role has changed. It's never been my experience. There was a time when, board members went and everybody was sort of half asleep and everybody just nodded yes to everything. I've not experienced that. And certainly, I think when I go into a boardroom, everybody's done the pre-read, lots of questions, a lot of interaction, and full debate on different topics. Personally, I love that. Yeah, I do think things have evolved, and I think it's going to continue to evolve.
It's been reported, a lot of talk around external review of board members. Maybe it's because the expectations of the roles have changed from when maybe they didn't need to do, the pre-work and really be engaged. Now you do because of the fiduciary responsibility. A lot of talk around external review of board members. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why is that so critically important to the board and its effectiveness?
All of the boards that I sit on, we do our own review, board member evaluation. Some boards it's every year, some boards it's every other year. But we get an external company to come in and run the process for us. So most boards either do it every year or every other year. I don't know of too many boards that go more than 2 years without doing it. It varies from board to board. I will say that there are some boards, not the ones that I sit on, where it's a check-the-box exercise. And that's unfortunate because it's honestly, when you're a leader in a company, you get an annual review. The board evaluation should sort of be the annual review for you as a board member. And if you're a good board member, you want to know, how can I do better? What can I do better? What am I doing in the boardroom that's constructive, that's working? What would you like to see more of, less of? So that's certainly my approach to the board reviews. So there are two types of evaluations. You'll do an individual member evaluation, a committee evaluation, and then an overall board evaluation. It used to be run often by internal legal team.
Interesting.
Yes, it used to be the internal legal team would run it. More and more, it's now being done by an external service. First, and I think that's an improvement. One, I think it puts the legal team in an awkward position.
Absolutely.
To be listening to board members saying, well, I didn't like Debra's comments. So I think it's better when it's external, and I think it's much more objective. It doesn't put the legal team in any sort of awkward position. The external companies come with experience of having done it at other places. So they also know, I think, how to run the process in such a way that can be more helpful.
So you said talent matters, which makes sense, is true of every organization. Talent matters. And it certainly matters at the top of the organization, especially in these roles that are so critically important to the success of the organization. Talk a little bit about kind of the pipeline of talent to fill these incredible roles. You mentioned cybersecurity, and the conference board recently did a study where they were talking about that pipeline now is actually going further down the organization beyond just the CEO to junior executives to pick up talent like cybersecurity, for example. In fact, I think it was like 25% of new board members had some experience in cyber. And so how do you think about building that pipeline to take over these incredibly important roles?
So I'm fortunate to sit on the nominating and governance committee of every board that I'm a member of. As you mentioned, I chair the Nominating and Governance Committee at Dollar General. So the first thing that is typically done is we take a look at the skill sets that we have today. So every board member, what are the things that you've done? Were you a CEO? Were you a CFO? Were you a division leader? We have sort of a skills matrix of the current board. I like when we match that to the strategic plan of the organization and the needs of the business. Not every business requires somebody with cybersecurity experience on the board. Not every corporation needs someone on the board with AI knowledge. But you do want to think about, for this business, strategically going forward. So, for example, if a big part of the strategic plan says we will expand internationally into Asia and Africa, and you have no one on the board with business experience in those markets, that tells you that's a gap. And so that would inform the board search for, guess what? Not tomorrow, but pretty soon, we need to get someone, because management is going to be coming in and talking to the board about the expansion plans and who can challenge it. Who here has the experience to challenge those things? We'll need that. You take your skills matrix of the current board, you match that to the strategic needs of the business. What are the skills and what are the primary conversations and issues that the business will be facing over the next 5 years or so? I personally don't think 10 years is very helpful, because nobody knows the pace at which our world is changing today.
It's
right?
incredible. I agree.
So we typically sort of look out 5 years and then use that to inform, okay, fine, guess what? We're going to be doing a huge SAP rollout in the next 5-10 years. Nobody on this board has the sort of knowledge, and that's a huge investment. It's a huge capital investment. Do we need someone on the board? Do we need an advisor? Sometimes it's not necessarily a board member, but it's a committee that works with an outside advisor to help the board, to educate the board and to bring them up to speed and to help them make some of the decisions. Typically, that process informs what's needed on the board, and you go find that. It sometimes means adding to the board. It sometimes means replacing people on the board. And that gets back to the courage that we talked about earlier, which is, thank you for your service. The skill set that you first brought that we needed then is no longer needed, and here's what we do need. So we'll be asking you to not stand for re-election. Yeah. And it's not, it's not an easy conversation, but it's a required one at times.
For the health of the organization, and of course, again, for the fiduciary responsibility that the board has.
Yeah, we can't just keep adding people, right? You can't, there's a certain number of people that need to be around the room, and it can't be 20 people because you just keep adding. So you do have to make these tough decisions.
And to your point, right, a strategic plan is a living document, and that's going to change all the time. And so you have to have the talent in place to carry that out.
That's
and that
exactly
includes at the board level as well. So I want to talk with you a little bit about diversity on corporate boards, because I know that's something you're very committed to. Corporate America, at this point in time, right, we have more diversity on our corporate boards than we've ever had before. However, given the current political landscape, there's some staggering numbers that the corporate board reported on in terms of recent appointments. And so I'm just going to read some stats to you. Slowdown in new board appointments of new Black directors in the Russell 3000 fell from 26% in 2022 to 12% in 2024, and new female board appointments in the S&P and 500 dropped from 41% in 2024 to 37% in early 25. That's the lowest level it has been in years, 6 years actually. And what is fascinating about this is that there is a growing body of research that really supports the business case for diversity on the corporate board, both around profitability and around innovation. Talk a little bit about what are boards thinking in terms of diversity and how can they navigate shareholder expectations and also the importance of creating a culture in a board where it values diversity and people want to be a part of that board.
So let me start by saying those numbers are depressing. And even I hadn't heard some of those numbers until you shared them with me. I knew that, especially for Black directors, that the numbers were down. I didn't realize it was down quite so severely. So let's say a couple of things. And I can only speak to the boards that I'm on and through my work at TrueStar, the boards that I have had access to. So, I mean, it's a fair amount, right? And I would say that most boards get it. So we're no longer having to make the case for diversity. I haven't found myself in a position where I have to sell someone on a board about the case for diversity. I am a female who is an Afro-Latina. So if I'm on the board, I think they kind of got a little bit of the message already, right? And then in my work at TrueStar, boards initially came to TrueStar primarily in search of diversity for the boards, because we started with putting women on boards, then people of color, then any diversity. And now we've sort of broadened the search. It was like, hey, look, we'll do what our client needs, right? But the reality is that is still, for the most part, our specialty and what people think of us primarily for. So we're not having to make the case. By the time they come to us, most boards get it. As I said, the boards that I'm on, I think that's part of why I'm there, not the only reason. So the issue then becomes, I think, is how much diversity is required and how much is, quote unquote, enough. Right? There was a time where it was, hey, look, you need to have at least 40% women on the board or we'll vote against you. And there's still some funds that adhere to that. And I'm glad for that because I will say this, getting one woman or one person of color on your board is not it. It's like anything else. You want, and I like to use the word big D, broad diversity on the board. It's not good to have, 10 CEOs around the table. You want to mix it up. You want someone with CEO experience, of course, but you also need someone with financial experience. So you need CFOs. You also need people with operating experience. That's different to those, right? If you are a board in the tech space, you probably will want some other things. You probably will want cyber. You probably will want AI. You probably want a technology committee, a CIO, CTO. And you want folks that have as broad an experience as possible that they will bring to the table to inform the discussions that you guys are making around the table. I think everybody gets that, right? How we went from that to my friends on the board, I'm not entirely sure. But the good news is I think today most boards get it, that diversity, that having a diversity of thought, diversity experience, very important to me as well, age experience. Some boards, you get to a certain age and it's time to retire. And I get that, and I get why that rule was put in place. I will say this. I think you want to be very careful about how you execute that rule because sometimes you have such experience walking out the door, and not every 75-year-old is the same. On some of my boards, the 75-year-old is the most informed, the most active, asks the best questions. And why are we exiting this person because of age? Let's examine that a little bit more closely. I think you want to have a diversity of experience, a diversity of backgrounds, gender, every which way, because the data shows that it makes for better decisions. The fact that the numbers are down so sharply is disturbing to me because the numbers were not great to begin with. We're not at the level of quote unquote equality, or we're not even at the level of representation. I think it's a little bit better for women, as the numbers would bear out. But I do see in a lot of the boards, what I do see happening is I do see some of the former CEOs retiring off the boards and being replaced by more current. I don't have a problem with that. We're still in a place where the CEOs are going to be white male. That's the majority of the pool. That's just the way it still is today. That could be impacting the numbers. But I think we want to stay close to this one because I would hate for us to get to the point where we've gone all the way back and then have to build back the experience that, we're letting walk out the door. I'm happy to say that it's not the experience on the boards that I'm on. I don't doubt, the numbers at all because, we see what's happening in the broader marketplace.
Interesting. The conference board talked about pointing out that there is about a third of all corporate board seats are held by women, but only 1 in 10 women are corporate chairs of boards, right? And so we're still fighting that fight. Coupled with, Harvard came out with some research that I thought was fascinating that I'd love to get your thoughts on, that women sitting on corporate boards, nearly a third of them reported that they don't feel that they can influence decisions. They don't feel comfortable voicing their opinion, and yet you're absolutely right. That's what makes for a better discussion, right? Having those debates, filling in the gaps, seeing their value that they're adding to that discussion means you need to be able to listen to them, and they need to have the courage, right, in a safe space to be able to speak their mind. So can you talk a little bit about, and you mentioned before, the culture of every corporate board is different. How do you help them think about creating a sense of belongingness, creating opportunities for all voices to be heard? Because that would hopefully then lead to more representation as well.
Yeah, so this, in my view, speaks almost directly to your responsibility as a board member, especially if you are a board member who's different. You cannot just go in and take the seat and see things happening that you don't speak up about. I also know that there are times when, sometimes you have to speak up about something and it feels like self-serving, or I'm the only person in this population that I'm speaking up about. So, for example, I remember I was on a board and we were looking at the annual comp. There were 3 women on the board, and as we looked at it, we all looked at each other and said, it looks like some of the women are getting lower raises than the men. And why is that? And we spoke amongst ourselves before, and we had planned for how we were going to deal with this in the meeting. Well, lo and behold, before we could open our mouths, one of the men in the room spoke up and said, hey, look, I'm looking at these numbers and I'm concerned about, can you talk about it? And we would look at each other like, this is fabulous. This is fabulous, because you don't want to be the woman talking only to the women issues. I'm not here to only talk about women issues. I'm here to talk about business issues. And so that's what you would want to have happen, right? At the same time, if I'm a woman on a board and I'm feeling like, there are issues, I would say then you're not in the right boardroom if you feel that you cannot speak up. You either need to find a way to speak up, speak out, or get out.
Yeah.
It gets back to the courage. Especially when you're a new board member, you do have to sit and learn a little bit about how things are done. You don't just sort of jump in and I'm going to change things around here. So I always advise folks to sort of just make sure you're listening. You have a board buddy. You're speaking to someone. Well, how do things get resolved here? My personal style that has never steered me wrong, because I used it in business and I use it in the boardroom. I don't wait for the board meeting to spring a big question or big challenge on anyone. If I see something, you typically get the materials ahead of time. Mm-hmm. You read the materials, and if there's something in there or something that's going on, my approach is to reach out to either management or the board chair or someone and say, hey, look, I was looking at the materials. I'm a little concerned. Help me understand, how do we raise this in the meeting? What do you think? Sometimes I might talk to a board buddy, a friend on the board, say, hey, look, I'm reading this. Am I interpreting this right? Do you see it the same way that I do? You sort of have to work the issue, right? If you want it, and it comes back to being effective. I don't like when people want to catch people out. And so you raise it in the boardroom and it's a big fanfare because you want to make them look bad. I don't think that's effective. Nobody likes that. I've been on both sides of the chair, whether it's presenting to the board, as management or being now a board member. It doesn't work well. And so I always say to folks, you have to find a way to speak up. You cannot go to every single board meeting and collect the check and not raise the issue. And I realize it might be uncomfortable. And if at the end of the day, you may just have to say, guess what, this is not the right environment for me, and you move on.
Yeah. I think that's great advice no matter where you are and what level of the organization, right? If it's not the right cultural fit, you can't stay. And I love your advice about kind of dealing with the issues before the meeting, right? That's just smart.
It really works.
Yeah, right? Political skill. I want to ask you a little bit about being chair of the governance committee for Dollar General. What are some of the key responsibilities in that role and challenges that you face navigating a lot of these issues from that leadership position?
I think it's important to remember about boards. We're not running the company. We're there typically 2 days a quarter, right? So you're there 8 days a year. And we talk about, noses in, fingers out, right? So you're leading in, but, you're not running the business. So you have to remember your role is oversight and not management. As part of the governance committee, I work very closely with the legal team at Dollar General, because governance, our job is to make sure the company is following the laws and responsibilities to allow us to represent the shareholders. So any laws that we're supposed to be following, they keep us up on, hey, look, this is what we got to do. This is how we have to manage this. If this happens, this must be reported. So, that's part of it. So a really close partnership with legal in my particular role is very important. How many meetings a year, board attendance, all of these things get reported. One of the biggest responsibilities is in bringing new people onto the board. We don't bring on tons of people, obviously. It might be one person a year or every other year. That's why sort of going back to the board evaluation, making sure that we are doing good board evaluations, making sure that we are understanding the skills matrix and the skills that we have and the skills that we need. The committee also responds to any sort of shareholder issues and requests that are sent in. So we make sure that the board is informed. Management, what are you doing about these issues? And then following up on those types of things. I rely very heavily. This is where making sure that, one of our jobs is to make sure that we've got strong executive management. Yes. This is one of those situations where I'm relying very, very heavily. And so is every other chair. The chair of the audit committee is relying very heavily on the CFO, for example, and the financial leadership team. But in that role, again, as I said, I'm not running the business. And so my job is to just make sure that the board is following all of the laws of the state and the federal government, and that we are representing the shareholders. Shareholders, when they reach out to us, that they're responded to. Our committee also manages some of our sort of corporate responsibilities, so some of our social programs. And so that is understanding what those are and informing folks. And that's a wonderful part of the job, right? So I really do enjoy that. It's a very significant role, but I would say when you have good corporate leadership on the executive committee, it's much more manageable.
A key part, as you said, is also bringing on new board members. And I know you're looking at skills gaps. What else are you looking for? In other words, in your mind, when you're interviewing board members, and I know you get asked this all the time, what else are you looking for besides those skills that you need?
Yeah.
Are there intangibles?
Yes. It's like anything else, right? So if you're hiring someone into your organization, you are looking for the skills, but then you're also looking for some sort of a personality match. And this is something we do all the time at TrueStar, because I sometimes feel like, okay, I'm playing the match game, because when I'm recruiting someone, on paper, I may have two candidates. They fit the skills that the company is looking for. But I've got one who is maybe more quiet and doesn't speak up as much, and then the other candidate, same skills on paper, but they might be more animated and more involved. Yeah. And so one of the things at TrueStar we try to do is we try to meet the other members of the board, we try to meet the CEO, and try to get a sense of what kind of boardroom is it. So this person who's animated and asking questions all the time, is that going to fit with the way that boardroom works? Or are they going to enjoy someone who perhaps has the requirements, but they're a little bit more reserved? and conservative. And so it's the same thing with the boards that I'm on. You do want to match the culture. So the first thing is, do you have the skills, right? So that's not negotiable. These are the skills that we require. And that's not that difficult to find for the most part. I mean, unless you're looking for, someone who's in AI in this particular industry with this amount, 20 years of experience.
Unicorn.
You don't have it, yes. But they're all unicorns to some extent. But, so then it gets to matching the culture of that boardroom. It's harder to describe, Janet, because it's one of those things where you know it when you see it. And for boards as well, as we interview folks, it's, I'm not going to call names. I remember we were interviewing some candidates. They all had the necessary skill set. And one of the board members said, "Oh, my God, they talk too much. They didn't listen. And they just talked and talked and talked. I would ask one question, and 20 minutes later, they were still answering. And so, that's not going to work in this boardroom." So I think it's just one of those things where it's a little bit I don't like to call it the dating game, but it's a little bit of you have to match not just the skills, but the personality. And that's sort of a softer thing. It's kind of like you know it when you see it, but you hear this all the time. What is the fit? Will this person fit in our boardroom? And there was a time where I didn't always like that because it felt like it would exclude people who were different. Yeah. But it's less about are you female or Black and more stylistically, would you fit for the most part? So it's a softer skill, but it's very required, I can tell you. Because board meetings are typically 2 days, you don't want someone who's disruptive. You don't want someone who doesn't understand that you can't take over the agenda, because you have a question on an issue, for example. Finding someone who will fit into your style of management is critical.
Well, didn't Michael Porter say, right? Culture eats strategy.
Every day of the week.
Every day,
yes.
right? Every day. Well, I could keep asking you questions, and there's so much more to talk about. But we are at that point in time in our interview here at Inside the Z-Suite. We like to ask our guests just some fun questions that I want you to answer off the top of your head.
Okay. Let's
Are
see.
you ready?
Yes, let's go.
All right. If you could trade places with anyone or anything, who or what would it be?
Oh, my goodness. Trade place. My daughter. I would trade place. My daughter is living her best life right now. She's doing what I wanted to do, which was live in Europe and travel and study art and have my mother pay the bill.
Smart girl. What is your favorite household chore?
I don't know if I have one of those. A favorite household chore. I guess I don't think of it as a chore. I love to cook. I don't like to clean up, but I love to cook. Honestly, I don't enjoy cooking for one or two, cooking for myself, my fiancé. I love to cook for a group. So we had some friends over the other night. I enjoy that, dinner parties or family events. I come from a family of very, very strong matriarchs who love to cook. I'm learning their recipes. I enjoy it, and I love experimenting with it.
I had the opportunity through your company to taste some of those great foods, and they're delicious.
Yes, I'm glad you like them.
So I think you might have said this, but is your least favorite chore washing pots?
Oh, gosh, yes. Clean. Literally, and I'm a messy chef. I'll use 10 pots to do the one thing because I might start with one. It's like, oh, I don't want this one. And so by the end, you sort of look around and the kitchen is a disaster. And I literally wish I could just sort of, do the, I'm going to date myself here, bewitched thing, but, just twinkle my nose. And it's all, sparkling pots and pans. I don't like cleanup at all. Of course, you do it, but it's, it's my least favorite chore.
All right. And final question. And this really is for the students who are listening. What is the key to success?
Oh, how much time do we have? It's funny. I think for me, the key starts first with hard work. So, get smart, build skills in the areas that you are interested in. Work to the point where you know what you're doing and you can add value. You're not going to always know everything. I'm not saying that. But get to the point where you can add value on a topic or on an issue that might be different, You might have a different point of view, but get smart about it, So if you're in marketing, learn about different brands, different types of marketing, learn different approaches, go out there, read, talk to people, experience different things. I still love, as a marketer, I still love to just walk up and down grocery store aisles to look at different products and how they're being positioned and priced. And, oh, look, this is new. I never saw this before. Where did that come from? I still enjoy that. So I think it starts first with that, but that you can't end there. The other thing I would say to folks is build a strong network. And that network should comprise of peers. It should comprise mentors and champions. And champions are those people who are going to, quote unquote, champion you when the door is closed and a decision has to be made about who gets that promotion or who gets the special project. You need someone to say, why not Janet for that? All right, why not? Yes, you know what? I think that's a great idea. Let's give Janet. So you need that. And just doing the hard work is not enough. You have to invest in those relationships to make sure that people know what you want. They could represent you when you're not in the room.
Such great advice, Debra. Thank you so much for sharing all of your interesting perspectives and insights on the power and purpose of corporate governance. Your leadership in the boardroom and beyond highlights how strong, inclusive governance drives accountability, innovation, and long-term success. We are so proud to call you a ZARB alumna, and we are so grateful for everything you do for our university. Thanks also to our show's producer, Adrian Stoller, and WRHU audio engineer, John Mullen, for your support. Be sure to tune in each week on the radio and online to WRHU 88.7 FM, Hofstra University, for a new episode of Inside the Z-Suite, or catch up with our show wherever you enjoy your podcasts. For more information about this program and the ZARB School of Business, please visit hofstra.edu/business. Until next time, I'm Janet Lenihan from Inside the Z-Suite.